Hi, everybody. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List. And today we continue with our series of programs on behalf of the Bridge Alliance, which we call Fixing America's Broken Democracy. And Danielle is the head, or the executive director, actually, I should say, of the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO, short, POGO. So Danielle, welcome to our program.
Thank you, David.
And so tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about POGO, Project on Government Oversight.
Yes, well, I came to Washington in the 1980s really with the desire to fix government. I was drawn to it as a government major, as an undergraduate in college, and had come during the summers to do internships on Capitol Hill, and so one of my internships was with the predecessor organization to POGO. It was at that time called the Project on Military Procurement. It had been created by Pentagon whistleblowers who were concerned about wasteful spending and weapons that didn't work when they were out in the field for the troops. And it was a voice for those people who were inside the Pentagon who wanted to fix those problems. And I really got hooked with that model. I finished college, I came back as a research assistant, and in 1993, I ended up becoming the executive director. And it's the same job that I've had ever since. I just love it because there's obviously always important work to be done fixing government.
Well, you must be doing quite a job, because I know a national publication recently named you as one of the top 50 game changers in Washington. So congratulations on that. But I think we would all agree that the game still needs a little bit of changing. So we're not quite done yet. So Danielle, just try to be a little more specific, if you don't mind, and share with us some of the projects, goals, and objectives, challenges, and opportunities.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, we started as a Pentagon oversight organization, and our model was working with people who are on the inside, who had documents and information that was really going to help to expose the problems. We didn't just expose them, though. We then had the methodology of then working to fix those problems that we'd uncovered. So we have an investigations team and we have a policy team that are working to say, this is a systemic problem. This isn't just a one-off. If it's a case of needing to have an independent test and evaluation office, for example, in the Pentagon, which we helped to create back then, or for example, now we just testified this week on the need to make sure that our agency inspectors general are adequately protected. You may remember in the last administration, President Trump was just removing inspectors general, frankly, because they were revealing things that he wasn't happy about. And that's a real concern for us when you have those agency watchdogs who don't have the adequate protections. So that's an example of something we were just working on to fix that problem by getting legislation that will give them those kinds of protections.
I was just going to say, without meaning to get, political in this, that the fact that so many of the inspectors general were removed, that always confounded me, because, he at least ran on the platform of, draining the swamp and cleaning up government. And yet you would think that inspectors general would be among those who would lead that effort.
Well, there's a couple of reactions to that, David. The first is that he isn't the first president to have removed an IG improperly. In fact, President Obama did in the beginning of his administration. And we worked hard with Congress, in that case with actually probably mostly Republicans. No, it was actually Republicans and Democratic senators who really were unhappy with that, and began the process of getting some legislation, which has not yet been passed, to say, a president needs to have more constraints before they can remove an IG. Now, we had never experienced what we did under Trump, where he removed so many. It was sort of a wrecking ball across the inspector general community. And I think that, frankly, that alarmed, again, Democrats and Republicans in the Congress to elevate the need for this legislation, which is now moving through the Congress.
So, Danielle, I know when we talk about exposing things like waste and corruption and abuse of power in the government, many of us think of the Pentagon purchase of the the $10,000 toilet, I believe.
That was us, actually.
Oh, that was you.
Yeah, it was us.
So again, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing today and how you work with the government, I guess, which it would seem to me to be required to kind of help guide them and do the right things and make the right kind of decisions.
Well, it's one of these delicate balances we work with, but it's a lot of pushing and sometimes making them uncomfortable along the way. So on that particular example that you gave about wasteful spending, which I know as a business audience, you probably have many of your viewers who are sort of can't imagine operating a big institution which is so wasteful in its expenses and has sort of no real awareness of the impact on the bottom line. In that particular case of wasteful spending, in fact, we are testifying in a week before the Senate Budget Committee specifically around the need to allow government auditors to have access to meaningful cost and pricing data, which is something in the private sector, which is a no-brainer. But as you know, the government just in many ways has this very insular system that is self-perpetuating and helping the world of government contractors because they're just inadequately held accountable, but they couldn't survive in the kind of competition that exists in the private sector.
And I even understand, Danielle, you'll have to explain this to us. Your organization is also involved in activities such as police reform.
Well, we have a range of issues because we expanded our focus in 1990 beyond just the Pentagon and wasteful spending and abuse of power to across the federal government. And in 2017, we absorbed an organization called the Constitution Project. So we now have sort of rounded out, we're looking across the federal government, now in all three branches of government to make sure there isn't abuse of power, as well as waste and fraud and corruption in federal government. So as you know, in the news now, of course, we've become increasingly aware of the abuse of power by law enforcement, both local, but also in some cases, federal law enforcement against people's civil liberties. And one of the things that I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to work on is working to push the Justice Department to elevate its standards for example, before they just give grants to local law enforcement, which is a traditional part of the relationship between the federal government and police, to have a better sense of the pattern and practice of those police forces. Are they in fact regularly having to settle cases because they have violated people's civil liberties or abused power or actually murdered people? Right now, there isn't an adequate accountability to ensure that federal grant funds aren't going to those police forces.
And so you're working on that as well.
So that's an example of something that we're working both to collect the data because the government isn't doing a good enough job collecting it. And then we're working with the Congress to change both the legislation. And in this case, we have sort of an interested ear on the part of the Justice Department for them to be thinking about some things that they can do even without legislation.
Well, it seems like you're involved in many things. You have your hands full, even, and explain this to us if you don't mind. You're involved in monitoring loan fraud cases with regard to, I guess, businesses that recently received PPP money from COVID-19.
Well, that was an example of, a massive amount of federal funds going out the door quickly. And we were working as that law was being created, the CARES Act, sort of the big package of funds that went out during the Trump administration. We were working on Capitol Hill to ensure that there were provisions in the law that were now being used to ensure both transparency and accountability around who was getting those funds. And we created a website. It's the covidrelieftracker.org. And that has actually millions of data points on it. It's better than the government's tracker, just trying to get a better handle on, not to say we did believe the money needed to be spent. Our country was in crisis. But what was so important is to make sure that the right entities were receiving that money. And unfortunately, the execution of those programs, as was widely reported, and some of our investigators disclosed many of this, often the funds that were first going out the door through the PPP loans, for example, were not going to those entities that most needed it. It was going to those who were either had sort of the best banking relationship, so they were the best customers of those banks, and they got it first, leaving behind those who really needed it. So part of our continued focus on that is to have a track record where when our government or our country faces another economic crisis, we can learn from some of the mistakes that were made and learning how better to ensure that those entities that need the money are getting them, in addition to tracking when there's fraud and making sure that law enforcement's catching those who shouldn't have been receiving the money at all.
Kudos again to you. So Danielle, how's your organization funded? And it sounds like you must have a huge staff to get involved in all of these things.
We have
correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, we're not huge. We have a very dedicated staff. We're just a little under 50 people on our staff. And in order to maintain the credibility of our independence, we don't take any money from corporations or unions or the government. We don't take any money from anyone who has a financial interest in the outcome of our investigations. And so what that comes down to is family foundations, as well as individuals who are supporting us. Now, about 20% of our funding comes from individuals who really just care a lot about our work and care about helping to make our government better.
Excuse me, I understand, Danielle, that you are forming some sort of business roundtable to get businesses involved in your efforts as well, or you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, well, it's really to get insights from business leaders who are outside of Washington. All that we hear from in Washington are those businesses that are essentially doing business with the government. And that's, of course, a self-fulfilling prophecy that those businesses have the least accountability. There's so much we know that we could be learning about best practices from those businesses that are outside Washington on how to make our institutions work better. And also, it's a whole world of people who are interested in how to make the government work better. I'd like to learn more about what those people have to offer.
Good. And so, Danielle, what else have I not asked you that you'd like to share with our viewers about POGO and its work?
Well, I have to say one thing that I'm particularly proud of is we've been around for 40 years, and that means we have been doing this work during Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. And we've been able to maintain our integrity as a nonpartisan organization. We are not pulling punches no matter who is president or who is running the Congress. We're working towards our goal of a more effective, ethical, and accountable federal government. And that's something that is challenging sometimes. This is an increasingly partisan landscape to work in Washington, but I think we're doing a good job of it.
Yes, it seems that you are. And I know that your colleagues in the Bridge Alliance are trying to help you and work with you to make this whole environment a little less partisan than it currently is.
That's right.
And so, Danielle, are there opportunities for people, whether they're business executives or just Joe or Jane on the street,
yes,
to become involved in your organization? And if so, tell us how.
We want people who are interested in engaging. We need what we call ambassadors, who are people who are in their districts who we can train and teach to communicate directly with their elected officials. And the way to do that is to contact our Director of Civic Engagement, Zoe Ryder. So her email is zreiter@pogo, POGO.org. And reach out and say you want to get involved. That's exactly what we're looking for.
That's great. And I assume POGO is your website as well that people can find you?
It's pogo.org, O-R-G, not
okay.
pogo.com, which is a gaming site.
Yeah, gee, I wonder, and how about Pogo Stick? Is there
there isn't one out there.
There isn't one out there.
I don't know. I don't think so. But
well, it sounds like no. I guess I would have to say, pun intended. Pogo, you're really trying to stick it to them. So
well played.
Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Danielle, for your time. This has been very interesting, and we'll look forward to watching your organization and your continued success, and then you personally as a game changer in DC. Keep up the good fight for sure.
Well, thank you very much, David, for including me.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for watching. This is David Nevins on behalf of the Bridge Alliance and their project entitled Fixing America's Broken Democracy, and also on behalf of Citybiz List. Thank you again for being with us today.